Hi, everyone, and welcome to our celebration of the reissue of Graeme Gibson's The Bedside Book of Birds tonight, with Margaret Atwood, David Sibley, and Jonathan Meiburg, moderated by Jessica Leber. My name is Jillian Brillia with Doubleday, and I have just a few housekeeping items to touch on before I turn things over to tonight's brilliant speakers. Now, this part's really important because there are so many of you, and we really want to make sure we get all your questions channeled in the proper direction so that we can see them. So if you'd like to submit questions for our speakers, you can do so by utilizing the Q&A module, which should be available at the bottom of your screen. I can see there's already 4 questions in there, so good job figuring that out. And that's where we'll be monitoring all of the questions for tonight. You can also upvote questions submitted by others, and you can activate the Zoom chat, which should be at the bottom of your screen, and comment along with the conversation. As a reminder, there's a suggested ticket donation tonight of $5 or more to the Pelee Island Bird Observatory for tonight, a cause near and dear to Graeme and Margaret. I'll be dropping the donation link as well as links to purchase signed copies of books by our lovely speakers throughout the chat this evening. Now I'm going to ask Margaret, David, Jonathan, and Jessica to start their microphones and cameras and come on to the digital stage. All right, while our speakers are getting settled, I'll mention that our moderator this evening, Jessica Leber, is a senior editor for Audubon magazine and enjoys learning about birds. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I think I was screen sharing still. Oh, I'm so sorry. While our speakers are getting settled, I'll mention that our moderator this evening, Jessica Leber, is a senior editor for Audubon magazine and enjoys learning about birds every day while on the clock. She joined Audubon in 2018 after starting her journalism career there as a summer intern more than a decade earlier. In between, she's covered a wide range of environmental, science, and technology stories while on staff at publications including Fast Company, MIT Technology Review, ClimateWire, and more. With all of that, I'll now turn things over to Jessica.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and with 3 so distinguished authors who are each fascinated by birds. I'll do some quick introductions. First, we have Margaret Atwood, the author of more than 50 books of fiction, poetry, essays, and graphic novels. She's also an avid birder and passionate bird advocate. For decades, she did this right alongside her late partner, another literary giant, Graeme Gibson. Together, they helped found the Pelee Island Bird Observatory in Canada. Next, it's an honor to introduce the renowned naturalist, author, and artist, David Sibley. He has published many, many field guides that have helped countless new and expert birders alike. Some are probably on your shelves, like mine back here. And finally, we have Jonathan Meiburg, who is another triple threat. He is a singer and musician and the lead of an appropriately birdie band called Shearwater. He is also a very talented writer. If you've gotten the chance to check out his first book, which is out today, you already know that. So let's get into this. I'm going to spend a few minutes with each of the panelists talking about these latest books. Then we'll have some broader discussion and then questions from the audience at around 7:40. So please, everyone, keep dropping in questions as we're talking. Margaret, let's start with you. We're celebrating Graeme's book, The Bedside Book of Birds, which was first published in 2005 and is being released again today with a new foreword by you. It's such a rich work and such a clear labor of love. So can you just describe what Graeme set out to do with this book?
Okay, so it's called an avian miscellany. So it's not an anthology, it's a miscellany, which means soup to nuts, everything. Poems, prose pieces, images, sculptures, mythologies, legends, writing by scientists, people's personal accounts, just everything he collected. And he collected about 4 times as much as he was able to put into the book. So just wherever we went, he would collect things. Some of them were images, some of them were doodads that we have in our house, some of them were pictures, some of them were stories from people. He was the person who first took birding to Cuba, and that was interesting. It took him about 2 years to convince the government that these people with binoculars were not going to be spies, and also that people were interested in doing this. So now that's well understood, and people go to Cuba a lot because it's got 23, I think at last count, endemics, birds that you can't see anywhere else but there. And he was into that for years. So wherever we went, he would pick things up, collect them, and finally, after 10 years of no publishers being interested, finally his collection got published as the Bedside Book of Birds. And much to some of the publishers' surprise, because earlier they thought, who would be interested in that? It was very, very popular. So it's being reissued now because there weren't any more. And I did a new foreword to it, talking about his interest in birds and how he went about things. And each of the sections has got a personal account by him of a particular bird.
It's the perfect time to do this reissue. Reading it, it's pretty quickly clear how our human and cultural relationships with birds like really run the gamut from positive to negative feelings and emotions. But when you read it, common themes also come across that cut through whatever time we live in and whatever place. So, I'm curious what you think about why people react so strongly to birds, whoever they are and wherever they live.
Well, first of all, they've always been with us.
Mm-hmm.
They're much older than we are, so we came into a world that was already theirs. I'm wearing my dinosaur shirt in homage to their ancestry. So they did descend from dinosaurs. Second, they did two things that we have always envied and wanted to do ourselves. One was singing, and we learned how to do that pretty early. So songbirds and people make melodic sounds. Not all birds do. Some of them just squawk, but the singing ones do make wonderful sounds. And the other thing they did that we envied was flying. So for thousands of years, we gave wings to the gods. They could do something we couldn't, and one of those things was flying. We did eventually learn how to fly, but it's cumbersome by comparison. We've got balloons, we've got airplanes, helicopters, and rockets, but it's not the same as just being able to lift off. So, as it says in the book, we gave the wings to the angels and the claws to the devils.
That's a great quote. I really appreciate the depth of the lesser known writings and art in here, especially from non-Western and indigenous cultures. How did Graeme do all the research and find and assemble this to a greater whole?
Well, he wasn't originally doing research. He was just collecting stuff he liked. So it was a subject he was fascinated by, and whenever he would come across somebody talking about birds, he would collect it.
Mm-hmm.
So wherever we went, he would look. We would go to natural history museums, we would go to art museums, and we would just talk to people. So that piles up pretty quickly, because wherever you go, people have got bird stories. A lot of origin stories of cultures involve eggs. Makes sense. Some of them involve clamshells, but a lot of them involve eggs. The human beings were hatched out of an egg, or the universe came out of a bird-like creature. The spirit brooded upon the waters. That's a bird image. So it's just in there in our deep past. And we've seen during this pandemic how people have turned again to the natural world. And there are a whole bunch of new birding converts out there right now. That's where David comes in.
Yeah, Audubon has been really seeing a huge boom in just new people interested in the birds around them. Last question, as you mentioned, Graeme starts each chapter with some personal anecdotes, and clearly you two both had a special relationship with birds. So would you like to just talk a little bit about what your birding life was like together, and how he connected to birds?
Well, I think like everybody's birding life, it was sometimes pretty hilarious. So we all have those stories about something that we can't make out. We don't know what it is. You watch it and watch it and watch it. I think my best one was something that was either a snowy owl or a big plastic gallon milk bottle. And this was when it was very cold. It was Amherst Island, which, as you will know, David, is a great place in winter for owls because of all the mice. And we were watching it and watching it and watching it. And just as we were saying, it has to be the milk bottle, it flew away. So we all have stories like that. Looks like a piece of wood, isn't a piece of wood, or looks like a bird, actually is a piece of wood.
Absolutely. All right. Last quick question, just curious. Do you think readers will have good dreams or bad dreams if they're actually keeping this book by their bedside?
Oh, good dreams, I would
Good
say.
dreams.
Mostly good. I mean,
Okay.
we have the odd, and I do say odd, Alfred Hitchcock person who finds birds scary.
Yes.
And makes films like The Birds, in which you can actually see the pieces of string attaching the birds to the roof. But most people who turn to birds are doing so out of interest and love for them rather than fear.
Absolutely. Jonathan, let's turn to you. The Bedside Book of Birds is a really wide-ranging book. In contrast, you became captivated by one bird in one place.
Yes.
Your debut book is called A Most Remarkable Creature. Tell us a little bit about how you became entranced by this remarkable creature.
Well, first I should tell you there's a raging thunderstorm going on here right now. So if I suddenly disappear, oh my God, look at that.
There it goes.
So if I'd suddenly disappear, that's why. But yeah, I was struck. I think most people who like birds have a sort of messenger bird that strikes them first in one way or another, that makes them, that just turns their head a little bit. And for me, it was striated caracaras, which live in the Falkland Islands. And anybody who's been lucky enough to go there has probably, though not definitely, encountered them because they don't live in the one town. They live only on the outlying islands in the Falklands. But they're sort of like a, if I guess when Darwin met them in 1833, he was so surprised by them that he spent more ink on them in The Voyage of the Beagle than he did any other bird species. They're sort of like a combination of a hawk and a crow. They're all the caracaras are members of the falcon family, but they don't behave like regular birds of prey do. They're social, they're curious. They'll come up to you and try to take things out of your bag. They like to play games with you. There's just an alertness and a sort of consciousness in their eyes that's very odd and very striking. And when I met them there back in 1997, when I was on a traveling fellowship just after college and was about the same age as Darwin was when he met them, I was struck in the same way. I thought, what are these birds? What are they doing here? What's the story? And Darwin said that these birds, doubtless for some good reason, have chosen these islands for their metropolis, but he never figured out what that reason was, even though he knew they had relatives on the mainland in South America. And so I kind of took that as the MacGuffin, and over the last, oh my goodness, 25 years, I wasn't kidding. There was
things off your head.
Over the last 25 years, I've just chased them, chased the answer to this question. What are they? What are they doing here? What does it mean that they're here? How do they regard us? And one thing that I learned was that the Falklands are maybe the only place in the entire New World that Europeans actually discovered. And as such, the animals, which this surprised Darwin, are very tame seeming because they have no experience with us. And it gives you a little sort of glimpse into the dream time and the time when humans and animals were unknown to one another and met for the first time. And the animals still have this quality about them now. And it reminds you that for animals, not just birds, but all animals, running away from us was not their first instinct. We had to teach them to do that.
And yeah, I mean, I think part of what's fascinating about your book is it starts so specific and then takes us on this journey through avian evolution and exploring this whole lineage of caracaras alive today. First, just a question I'm going to put to you that I want to get out of the way because I really thought about it after reading your book is yes or no, did dinosaurs ever actually go extinct?
Oh no, they did not.
Maybe not. Okay.
David, I think you'd agree with that.
Yes, yeah.
it was a kind of a revelation to me that we have living dinosaurs. How did this bird of prey come to be so scrappy and smart, and why are we only like, why is this story so little known?
Well, partly because they're very far away from most people.
Yeah.
But one thing that became clear to me, as I promise I'm not putting this on as a, it's a real Florida thunderstorm. I'm sorry, your question was, why haven't people noticed them before now?
Yeah.
The thing is that people haven't noticed many things. It was really a lesson that I took away from the book, from the experience of looking at the book, was there was far more not known about the natural world than I ever thought. And that this group happened to be a bird that was either so difficult to see that very few people ever saw it, or in its mainland relatives, so common in many places that people didn't think about them, sort of created this opening. And then there was also the fact that they're kind of, all the caracaras, all 10 species, are kind of not like other birds of prey. They're very inconvenient. They're really not like the so-called true falcons. They're not like hawks. They're not like eagles. And even Darwin called them false eagles, who ill become so high a rank. And so there's sort of been, I think, a little bit of a reluctance to get near them. A caracara researcher named Joan Morrison said to me that they're bad falcons, dirty birds. People don't want to get near them. And so I wondered why that was. What is it that's making them so repellent to people? And usually the animals that repel us the most are the ones that resemble us the most, I think. And I think that has something to do with it.
We see that a lot in cities when we talk about common birds around us. Some people love them and some people hate them, which was interesting because I was really intrigued how you ended the book in New York, where crested caracaras are appearing more frequently, because these are not really North American birds, or United States, Canada birds at least. Do you think that why do you think people in the US will start to enjoy caracaras more in their lifetime, and like what forces are driving that?
Well, they used to be here.
Yeah.
During the Pleistocene, I mean, they're in the La Brea tar pits. There are fossil caracaras in Arkansas, and they were part of that great big assemblage of ancient beasts that roamed during the ice ages, before people came across the Bering Strait and changed everything in the two new worlds. And so now they're returning after sort of disappearing at about the same time that a lot of the animals whose remains they would have presumably scavenged also disappeared. They've come back up, and I speculate about this in the end of the book. I think it might be because they like hanging out with vultures. And black vultures, as a lot of people know, are expanding their range greatly. I mean, they've been breeding further and further north. Caracaras like to hang out with vultures. There are pictures of them preening each other. They sort of pursue the same quarry. And so I think in some ways, a habitat has emerged recently because of a new predator that's been introduced in the last century that rivals the saber-tooths or any predator that ever existed, which is cars. I looked it up, and in I think 2014, the number of deer estimated killed on highways in the United States, and this is just deer, was equal to the wildlife, the wildebeest population of the Serengeti. And that's to say nothing of cats and dogs and possums and coyotes and everything that's killed by cars. It's very predictable where the roads are. There's some nice little stretches of open habitat along them, and vultures who figured this out know to just hang out right by the road, and they're going to have food in the morning. And I think the caracaras may be starting to join them.
Cool. So we're creating the opportunities for these birds. Fascinating. David, let's talk about What It's Like to Be a Bird, which came out last year, which really puts us in the mindset of birds like caracaras. It has your illustrations, but it's not a typical field guide. In the intro, you said birds are far more thoughtful than you'd ever imagine, which is incredible to hear coming from you, given that you spend your career observing birds. So just what did it mean to delve into what life is like for a bird, and how is that so different from your typical work?
Yeah, well, this book, it's a big departure from the field guide, but it is, I guess all of my work is kind of trying to get at the technical details of birds and make that accessible, kind of interpret that and so whether it's field marks and identification, or this book is all about the science of birds, but it's I was so amazed by the stuff I was learning that the book kind of evolved as I worked on it. It started out as a slightly different project and then turned into this collection of short essays about all these amazing things that I was learning. And every time I came up with a question and started researching it and reading, I was just blown away by how much I didn't know about birds before I started reading for this book. And there's still so much more. And like Jonathan just said, there's so much that isn't known. And I tried to highlight a lot of that in the book, the things that we don't know about even really familiar backyard birds. There's just a lot that isn't known. So all of that kind of came together, and it's really, for me, I approach it first as an illustration in a way, as scientific illustration, and then the text explains the picture. So that's kind of how the whole book was put together.
Is there something you learned, a particular fact that really blew you away as you were putting together the book?
There's so many, and so many myths busted. But I could I could name a bunch, but the first one that comes to mind right now is the bird's respiratory system. And it took me, I've heard about it. I've heard about the system, but actually struggling through the process of trying to do a simplified diagram and a very brief, concise explanation of it, I really had to dig in and understand how it works. And it's incredible that they air flows through their lungs in one direction. Not the lungs don't inflate and deflate like ours. The air flows through in one direction, like coolant through a car radiator. So, and it's always fresh air coming through. So when they inhale, fresh air flows through the lungs, and because of the air sac system, when they exhale, more fresh air that's been stored in the air sacs flows through the lungs. So they're getting just a constant circulation of fresh air through the lungs on inhale and exhale. And they are never out of breath. I say in the book, I think it's safe to say that you've never seen a bird that is out of breath. If you've seen a bird that's panting after exertion, that's because it's too hot and it's trying to cool off by panting, but they are never out of breath. And one of the interesting things about that, going back to dinosaurs, is that one of the theories about this is that this respiratory system evolved in dinosaurs hundreds of millions of years ago, when there was actually only half as much oxygen in the atmosphere as there is now. So they had to have a super efficient respiratory system. And now birds reap the benefits of that with a lot more oxygen in the air. But still, this super efficient respiratory system, they can do things like fly over the Himalayas.
You mentioned in the book how even instinctive behaviors like building a nest are maybe, you can imagine them motivated by very human-like feelings like pride or anxiety or satisfaction. I don't know, scientists tend to be a bit touchy about ascribing human feelings to birds. So I don't know, did you rethink that? Do you think that should be the case?
Yeah, it's a very sticky subject, and it's been, I think the way I heard about it when I was growing up, and what people would say then, is that anthropomorphizing was a huge no-no, that you can't ascribe any sort of feelings or thoughts or intuition to birds. But there's so much evidence of those things that I was talking to a researcher about 20 years ago about a migrating bird that was tracked. It had a tracking device, so they knew exactly which path this bird followed. And instead of migrating north across the Gulf of Mexico, it flew up to the northern end of the Yucatan Peninsula and then went south and around the Gulf of Mexico through Texas. And I said, do you think it made a choice there? Was the weather, or maybe its body condition, or some reason it decided not to fly across the Gulf and instead go around? And the researcher said, no, they're just automatons. That's the way it's programmed to do it. And that struck me as so wrong. There's so much evidence that they are making choices all the time. So it just seems to me that instinct can't just be like a computer program, instructions that they are bound to follow, like a robot follows its code. Instinct has to be much more subtle, and it's one input among many, and it's sort of balanced by other things. And yeah, it's a tricky subject and a really complicated thing. And we obviously, despite the title of the book, we have no way of knowing what it's like to be a bird. Their brains are very different from ours. Their perception is very different. But at the same time, I think that a lot of things like, the feeling of satisfaction that we get after, vacuuming or mowing the lawn or setting up the nursery for the expected baby, those feelings, I think, are instinct. That this probably the same kind of motivation that causes a bird to do things like build a nest, preen its feathers, that instinct, I think that's where instinct lies, is in those feelings of the motivating feelings that encourage us to do these things.
So we're a little more like birds than we thought too.
I think there are some connections, yes.
Okay. I'd like to talk a little more generally about birding with you all. Obviously the pandemic's kind of upended everyone's life, but really caused a boom in interest in the birds around us. This is kind of to any of you who want to weigh in, but I'm curious why you think birds are having such a moment this year, or what role birds have played in your life in the last year that it feels kind of unique to this moment. Would anyone like to go first? I'll just put it out to you.
Sure, I'll jump in. I think birds, well, this would go back to the conversation about what the common theme of Graeme's book that has brought us all together tonight. And I think that part of it is just sort of the magic of birds, that they have this, because of their powers of flight and migration, they appear and disappear at will and leave no trace. So they're, in all this mythology and folk tales, they represent life and death and the soul and all these sort of supernatural qualities represented in birds. And I think that's part of their magic, is just their ability to be in front of us one second and gone the next. And you never know what you're going to see. And that, I think that's what makes bird watching the most interesting, the most exciting form of nature study. And as far as the pandemic, I think that people are just craving that connection to nature. That there's something very reassuring about the cycles of seasons, the processes of nature, and birds are just a great way to get in touch with that are in everybody's backyard.
One of the selections in the Bedside Book of Birds that really struck me the most was the passage about birds on the Western Front in World War I, by Saki. And I think there was this sense, the way he describes that the birds are going on about their lives in various different ways while humans are consumed with destroying one another. And sometimes it's harrowing, sometimes it's funny. So like the magpies were trying to build a nest in this demolished poplar tree because magpies build nests in poplar trees. And but I think during the pandemic, when you look at birds, they don't know about the pandemic. It doesn't bother them. They don't care about it. And so suddenly you're very struck of watching them go about their lives like they always do. And this, despite this great sort of epical change in our own lives, they don't care. It's not something that they're dealing with, except indirectly. And you envy them, their freedom, kind of like the Birdman of Alcatraz in some ways.
Margaret, how have you experienced birds this year?
Well, we're experiencing not being able to go to some of the places we would normally go to. And ordinarily we would have a birding event on Pelee Island on the second weekend of May, which David knows about. So we had to throw together an online gala for that last year, and we're doing the same again this year. But let us say that Graeme ends the Bedside Book of Birds with birds as hope, which is something people have also always seen in them. And they've also always been messengers. So let us say that people may be viewing the birds as messengers, particularly in the northern hemisphere, where returning birds mean spring. And they also mean hope. So people have been pretty desperate for that over the past year and a quarter now. And I always get asked that, I bet you do too, is there hope? So yes, there is.
That's great to hear coming from you. There are a lot of ways to be a birder, Margaret. Do you keep a life list, or, do you go out looking for a specific bird, or just walk around and see what you see?
Well, we never kept a full life list. We kept trip lists of trips that we were on. We kept location lists, but we never put them all together. Graeme thought it was bad luck. So I have a lot of lists, but I don't have one huge list. And our interest in them was not so much check it off, see that, check it off, gone, as watching what they were doing, how they were interacting, their behavior, which is of course very different for each bird. They're not all the same. I would agree that they're not automatons, they're not robots. Some of them are indeed highly intelligent, and we're told that the raven is possibly the brightest bird, and they can certainly figure things out pretty well. But a lot of other birds can too. They're training us quite well.
I love the anecdote about how you and Graeme dressed up as ravens. Do you want to share that?
It was a Viking event. So instead of coming as actual Vikings, we came as Odin's ravens. We had 2 ravens, and their names were Thought and Memory. And they would fly around the world during the day, and in the evening they would come back and sit on the shoulders of Odin and tell him into his ears all the things that they had seen. And that is a very logical kind of mythology to develop, because ravens are quite interested in us. They have been known to accompany hunters. They certainly have been called warbirds because they would hang out around battlefields more to eat. And they like to hang out with polar bears in the north, because the polar bear will kill something and eat it, but there will be some bits. There will be some bits left over, so they're hanging around for the bits. So you will always see them, and one of the things about them that people will say is that they will help people hunt because they can see over hills. So they will fly up there, look over the hill. If there's something there, they'll give a wing tilt, sort of like World War I flying ace, and that means over here. And they hope that the hunter will kill something, and then they'll get some bits. So they're pretty smart. They've got that figured out.
Thanks. I'd love to ask one question, last set of questions before going to the audience. You are all polymaths in some way. I'd love to hear how you use your varying talents to connect with birds. Jonathan, maybe we could start with you. Does being a musician influence how you hear birdsong, or vice versa? Does hearing birds shape your music and writing, however you prefer to take that question?
Well, nobody ever asks Brian May if astrophysics affects the music of Queen. But I think,
Why not?
like, actually, that's true. You know, why not? They should ask that question. For me, birds and looking at birds and thinking about birds is a way to get outside my own head, which is something I feel like I value more and more as the years go by. And music, when it's at its best, is the same. The kind of camaraderie that you feel with other musicians, because people play like they are, in no matter what their level of technical ability, and that when you get to appreciate working with other people in that way and seeing them reveal themselves in that way, the world comes to you in a way that it doesn't when you're just working off your own presumptions. And with birds, I think it's very much the same. I mean, for the caracaras, they showed me this story. When I remember seeing them for the first time, they landed in front of me and just stared at me, and I felt like they were saying, "You." And I was like, "Me? I'm not even interested in birds." But 25 years later, I feel like I'm trying to sort of fulfill a kind of debt to them, and they led me into a much different understanding of what the world means, in the specific sense and in the most metaphorical sense you can imagine. I have to say about what Margaret said about ravens. Caracaras, because South America doesn't have large crows, fulfilled this same role there. But it's sort of like you built a set of colorful ravens on a falcon chassis. And they also will follow pumas. They follow people. The writer William Henry Hudson said that they'll follow a man with a gun. They're very good at sussing out opportunities and figuring out how we might be useful.
David, how does drawing help you just see more than you otherwise would about a bird?
Yeah, I mean, for me, drawing is my way of understanding the world. Really, there's a quote that I like by Peter Steinhardt. He wrote a book about drawing. He was an editor of Audubon magazine for many years, but he wrote a book about drawing, and he said, "A drawing is a picture of your understanding," and that really rings true to me. That if you don't understand something, you can't draw it. And at the same time, sitting down to draw something is one of the best ways to really figure it out. You have to find the lines and figure out how that whole thing fits together, to convert it into lines on a sheet of paper. So for me, drawing is really fundamental to understanding birds and understanding the world. So that's why, like I said earlier, my books are really collections of illustrations with a little annotations alongside the illustrations to explain them. But for me, it's all about creating the illustration that explains what I want to explain. But the process of researching and figuring all of that out, and figuring out the best way to convert it into an illustration, to convey the information that I want to convey in a clear and concise way. That's I enjoy that process. I learn a lot from it, but that's really fundamental to everything that I do.
David, there were two drawings in your book that I can't get out of my head. One is the drawing of the roadrunner at running at speeds compared to Usain Bolt, a sort of regular non-Usain Bolt human, and a coyote and an ostrich. And I just love the thought of all of them in this big road race together. And it completely illustrates your point so beautifully about their speed. But also the brown creeper, which you just have rendered at life size. Something about that just makes it jump off the page. You look at it as if there's actually a brown creeper just sitting right there, and it makes you understand it in a way that I never really thought about.
Well, thanks. Yeah, that Roadrunner illustration was one of the I came up with all these wacky questions that I wanted to answer in the book. And one was like, is the Roadrunner really that much faster than the Coyote? For those of us who grew up on Roadrunner cartoons. And so that was the answer. But yeah, that was it took a lot of research to calculate all those speeds, and convert them all into matching matching units to figure out where they would all finish in a race. But thanks. That's I appreciate that.
Margaret, you're a poet and a novelist. You have an amazingly gruesome poem about vultures in the Bedside Book of Birds.
An appreciative poem.
Do you have moments where you see a bird or bird scene and say, this would make a good poem or scene in a book?
I'm not sure that that's how poetry operates, but I did write a saga, which is a graphic novel, and it addressed the problem of feral cats, which, as we know, and domestic cats as well, kill an astonishing number of birds every year. But having been a cat person, I knew that it would be no good saying your cat is a terrible monster, you must drown it in the toilet, because that would get you nothing but hate mail and death threats. So instead, I made a superhero who was a combination of a human being, a cat, and a bird, so can understand both sides of the problem. And if this superhero had been created in the 1940s, he would have emerged from having fallen into a vat of chemicals. And if in the late 50s, he would have been bitten by a radioactive spider. But since he emerged in the 21st century, he comes from a collision between a car, a cat, a bird, a human being, and a vial of genetic super splicer. Makes sense, don't you think? So we did this as essentially it's a bird conservation project aimed at the key audience, 9 to 11-year-olds, who, if anybody, are going to be well placed to influence their family's behaviors around the family cat. As in, Mom, Dad, you can't do that, don't you know? Etc. So we created him. I had a wonderful illustration artist, because I would be incapable of drawing an anatomically correct flying person. Could not do it. I could have the idea, but I couldn't actually do the wings. You could do that, David. But this person's called Johnny Christmas, and he did some beautiful anatomically correct illustrations of a flying bird cat person called Angel Catbird. His mission is to rescue both cats and birds. And we have all the stats at the bottom, why you shouldn't let your cat outdoors, what's its likelihood of being hit by a car, getting lost, being eaten by raccoons, devoured by foxes and coyotes. And if you absorb all that, you will never, ever do that again. If you like your cat, or a slogan, why should your cat not be treated as well as your dog? I think that's good.
That sounds great.
Those are my writing skills at work at the absolute ground level.
Very creative.
Yeah, there you go.
I'd like to ask some audience questions. A few on where, when travel opens up, if you can go anywhere birding, where do you want to go? Or another question similar, do you have any favorite bird watching celebrations? So curious if any of you have anything on your upcoming bucket list.
Well, I will be going to Pelee Island anyway in May, but not for the usual gathering, because it's not soon enough to have a usual gathering. So we're going to do that online. We're going to do the Green Bird Race online, and we're going to do the dinner that concludes it online, and that's May the 8th. So if you go to pibo.ca, in a couple of days, that website should be up. And we will do, we tried to replicate all of the things that we would do in person, including the door prizes and the silly jokes and the rubber chicken choir. I'm the conductor of it, sorry musical people. We only have one number, it's an old MacDonald had a farm. The chickens sing the chorus.
Do either of you, David or Jonathan, want to weigh in?
Well, it's birdwatchers love to travel. It's one of the really exciting things about birdwatching is being able to go to all these far-flung places or just out of the way places and experience different birds. But I've actually kind of enjoyed this year of enforced home sitting and just watching the birds that are right here around my neighborhood, and seeing the seasons change here. So, but I guess there are a lot of places that I had planned to go in this past year that I wasn't able to go to. So they'll be up on the list of places that I hope to go as soon as travel is possible.
I'm curious. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay.
Oh, what do you got
Ireland
there?
for birds.
Ireland.
Collection.
Ah,
They're birds.
Ireland, yes.
New book.
In my book, one of the places that I went looking for caracaras was Guyana, which is just an extraordinary place. The Guyanas, I feel like, get left out of a lot of the popular conception of South America. I mean, they're sort of wedged between Venezuela and Brazil. And in the country of Guyana and its neighbors Suriname and French Guiana have some of the most beautiful and intact tropical forest in all of South America, and some unique birds too. But in Guyana, which used to be a British, people speak English, which makes it easier if you don't speak Portuguese. And it's to enter the tropics and be with people who live there and talk with them and experience that environment. So if I could go back to any of the places that I had been in the book, it would definitely be to Southern Guyana. It's just an extraordinary place and filled with birds and with also fascinating humans, and a landscape that I think just doesn't get thought about very often.
Yeah, you paint it very vividly in that book. So each of you, do you have a favorite bird? Or if you don't like to choose favorites, how about I force you? If you had to get a bird tattooed on your body, what would you choose?
Well, you're not choosing in that case for favoritism. You're choosing for aesthetic reasons.
Right. So what's your answer?
Oh, I would do an owl.
I'm contractually bound to a striated caracara.
Yes, you would have to do that. Not for beauty, but just because.
Yeah, I owe it too much.
I would, I can't really name a favorite bird, but when thinking about a tattoo as an illustrator, I'm concerned about how the illustration would look. And I'm afraid
your own tattoo.
a tattoo of an owl would be extremely difficult. They're so subtly patterned and intricately patterned. So for a tattoo, I might go for something like a hooded warbler with a really simple, straightforward pattern and a really sharp-looking bird.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know who will.
Oh,
that would be a
those are
cool
so good.
tattoo.
Nice.
Like this one. I mean, that would make a nice tattoo, don't you think?
That would, yes.
Yeah. So I'm winning him over.
I can't argue with that.
Do each of you have a birder or birding origin story, or what first got you interested in birds?
More owls.
Mm.
Yeah. So I just grew up with it. My dad was a biologist. He was a field biologist, and speaking to drawing, back in those days, the way they taught entomology was you stuck your eye onto the microscope and you drew the insect. So that is how they actually taught it, and you're quite right that that's how you learn things. So my dad was just a birder. He was an early conservationist. They were early Sierra Club, And like anybody who grows up in the religion, I was kind of ho-hum about it. Until along comes Graeme, a recent convert burning with zeal. Oh yeah, another one of those. But look at that. So that went on quite a while, and I think he sort of reconverted me, as it were. You can become a bit blasé if you've always been surrounded by these kinds of things. So you probably know Fred Wadsworth's work. He wrote the book called The Last of the Curlews, friend of my dad's, and we could go down the list. These people were just around a lot.
David, what about you?
How many pairs of binoculars? Why do you need another one?
Yeah, my story, my father's an ornithologist, so I grew up like Margaret did in a family family of where birds were just part of family life. And I will say it wasn't my father saying, hey, let's go birding. It was just on the weekends we went out for hikes. We went out with his colleagues or friends, and people were looking at plants and turning over logs and finding mole crickets and talking about birds and pointing things out, and I just got fascinated by nature and particularly birds. And I think bird watching is something that kids are naturally good at. It requires really sharp eyes and ears. And so it wasn't long before my brother and I were pointing out birds to my father, which is a really good feeling when you're 10 years old to be able to point out something to all the adults who are standing around with their fading eyes and ears, and you say, it's so obvious, it's right there. So it got a lot of reinforcement early on, I think, as a kid, and a birder, a lot of encouragement from all the adults, and then drawing was always a part of it for me. I always enjoyed drawing, and so even from as long ago as I can remember, but it was just something that we did. The house was full of bird books. The people who came over for barbecue on the weekend were ornithologists and naturalists, and that was the way life was.
That sounds lovely. Jonathan, I have two questions for you, a little different. Have you ever played your music to the remarkable creatures? Did they join in, or can you mimic their voices?
Oh, that I can. The voices I can do. Which one would you like to hear?
Your choice.
Okay, well then, a striated caracara, when you're right up, they make a lot of different sounds, but when you're right up on the nest, if you get near one of their nests, then they get very alarmed, and the pair, although it's not always a pair, sometimes there are 3 or 4 birds tending these nests, will start making these little chirps to each other. They're like, and then if they want to go into a full-on territorial display after that, they'll throw their heads back and make this call that's like, like, I mean, it's pretty ear splitting. Sorry, if you're right up near them, but the more familiar crested caracaras that we see in the U.S. Have this really striking sound that is sort of, it's like somebody compared it to dragging a stick across the top of a picket fence. It's like, and it's, once you hear it, you don't really forget it. It's kind of haunting in a weird way. But you're asking about music. No, I've never played music to the caracaras, but I have made some of those sounds to captive caracaras in England that I met. And that's really interesting because some of them had never met another bird of their species. And if I made these sounds to them, some of them just weren't impressed, but there were a few who just perked up and just stared as if they're like, I've never heard this sound come from somewhere else before.
Coming from a human, no less.
Yeah, it was uncanny. It was really, that was quite a moment.
And one quick question, where in Texas do you suggest to see caracaras?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's a place called the Martin Refuge that's down in Hidalgo County, right on the border with Mexico, just about. It's about 5 miles from the Rio Grande, and it's east of Edinburgh, Texas. And I just went there a couple of weeks ago. They feed raptors every week there by just setting out a whole bunch of meat that they get from a local taxidermist for people who've shot antelopes and things like that on game ranches around there. So they put out about 100 pounds of meat a week. And the day I was there were about 30 crested caracaras that came in, along with about a sort of a kettle of about 50 turkey vultures, some black vultures, 3 Harris hawks, and a red-tailed hawk, all came in to feast on this. And you could be about 15, 20 feet from them and watch and take as many pictures as you like. And I was just out of my mind with happiness at getting to see them so close. Because crested caracaras, unlike striated caracaras, have had many thousands of years to get used to us, and they know what we mean. So being able to be so close is quite a privilege. Again, it's called the Martin Refuge. You can look it up online.
Excellent. I think we just have a few minutes left. To close this out, I'd like to put that challenge to Margaret or David. Can either of you do some bird calls?
Oh, pretty elementary. You first, David?
I'm not big on imitating bird calls, but I can try a barred owl. They do the classic, well, classic if you're familiar with barred owl, but the mnemonic is "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" But they get into some really wild, barking, sort of primate sounding cackling also. But so
Very good.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm not as good at anything as you guys. Sorry.
Totally fair.
Under the loon. Oh, oh, oh.
that's good.
What bird was that? I think I cut you
Common
off.
loon.
Common loon. Excellent. That was impressive. Okay. I think we're nearly out of time, so I will. I want to thank you both, all of you, for participating in this panel and having such a great conversation. And I will kick it to Jillian for the outro.
Yes, thank you so much, Margaret, Jonathan, David, and Jessica. I think one of our viewers, Steve, put it very nicely when he said this conversation has been fascinating, warm, and moving. Join us next week when we talk to Brian May and discover the correlation between astrophysics and Bohemian Rhapsody. Just kidding, but we should try to get him on here. And thank you to everyone watching. You've been a wonderful audience. As a reminder, you can find signed books for all of these writers in the links that I popped into the chat. And the event tonight was hosted by Doubleday Canada and Doubleday US. Don't forget to take a look at the Pelee Island Bird Observatory's website and be on the lookout for our next event on Doubleday's social media channels or our Eventbrite page. Thank you so much for joining, everyone, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely
Thank you.
to meet you and meet you.
Hi, everyone. Good to meet you.
Bye.